don't we need to always remember the term data dependent? I mean, the Fed, they're not omniscient, are they?
No, the Fed's not omniscient. You're right about the data dependency. It was the incoming data that I think moved them from a pre-telegraphed 50 basis points to the 75 basis points that we saw yesterday. And I think Chairman Powell was pretty clear that they will be looking at and responding to the incoming data, both the actual inflation numbers from the labor force, labor market, and also something that's harder to gauge, which is inflation expectations. So data dependence in many dimensions.
It really does feel like incoming because it's not good, a lot of the data that we are seeing. Let me ask you this, Roger. There was some disagreement all along in the use of the term transitory. So there were plenty of doubters and skeptics and people on the other side of that argument. I don't know where you were. Is it your contention that the data at that time, let's say 6 to 9 months ago, was the weight of the evidence that it was transitory, or can we say that was sort of a major mistake in not taking it more seriously? And did that put us behind the curve?
Well, let me start with the last part. I think the Fed would probably admit that they're behind the curve, that they got started a little later than they would have liked, for sure. To be fair, it was ambiguous at the moment. So obviously people saw, supply shocks and weren't sure how long it would take for those to clear up. Clearly, some of this was due to the war that Russia started in Ukraine. Again, very unpredictable. Having said that, obviously, there was stimulus in the system from the Fed and from other decision makers. And so, it was ambiguous. My view was, and I did not engage in the permanent versus transitory debate, my view was that it was important for the Fed to make inflation as transitory as possible. And so, I do think there is a little sense that maybe they got started later than they would have liked, and now they're rushing really to catch up.
You're so nice. What did you just say? You said my view was that the Fed should make the inflation transitory, which means that it wasn't at the time. So you thought maybe they were rose-colored glasses at the time.
Look, I thought they had to recognize that they had been putting a lot of stimulus into the system, as have others, for good reason, because we were very concerned about the lasting impact of the pandemic. Right. So there was a fog of uncertainty that is always part of the process. It's also noticeable that everybody's modeling, I think, missed what was happening with inflation, because models aren't set up to deal with these big shocks that occur occasionally. And there were a couple of really big shocks that occurred from the reopening of the economy with supply chains uncertainty and also at the war. Now, there are also some historical precedents that most people didn't look at. So, I think, they're now in a process of trying to make up for some lost time.
Yeah. I mean, both fiscally and monetarily, we've spent a lot of money the last 2 years, obviously. But deficit hawks, the ones that don't kind of go back and forth, there are some long-term deficit hawks. They do complain that the Fed can be a partner to the fiscal authorities and allow them for profligate spending. You need the Fed to finance a lot of, keep rates low so that the government can keep spending money. So we did the American recovery. We were then proposing additional trillions, Roger, another 3-4 trillion. Right at the time, we were trying to decide whether inflation was transitory or not. Do you think that was a mistake? And would you think to continue to push another trillion in a smaller Build Back Better? Is that something you would be in favor of?
Well, Joe, let's go back to where we were at that moment, right? We were worried about coming out of a very deep and sharp recession. We had also had the experience earlier where, in hindsight, I'm talking about 2008, 2009, perhaps stimulus was a little too small, and it took a long time to get job recovery. And then finally, when you look at some of what was being proposed, it certainly would be in the category of a long-term investment. So it would have had a stimulative impact, but rebuilding infrastructure, things of that sort, are also called for. And so I think at this stage, I am going to be circumspect about, trying to exactly parse blame for where we are. The other thing that I think Jay said, that Chairman Powell said that was very important, is that while they're focused on and will do what they need to bring inflation under control, some of these are forces outside of their control. And so at this stage, instead of trying to understand how much or how little should have been done, I think where everyone's attention's got to be is driving this scourge of inflation out of the U.S. economy as best we can.